All right, lesson 6 is another way to graph equations by finding the x and y intercepts. And so, kind of like they sound, the point at which the line intersects the x-axis, which would be right here, is the x-intercept. And then the point where we already know the y-intercept is called the y, or where it intercepts the y-axis is the y-intercept. So, for the example here, it says identify the x and y intercept of the graph. So you should notice that the x-intercept, if we count over, it goes over 8 and then not up any. And so that would be 8, 0. And this is the x-intercept. Yeah. And then the y-intercept is not going left or right, and then it goes up 8. So if you notice, the x-intercept always has a 0 for the y. It's kind of like opposites. And the y-intercept is always going to have a 0 for the x, always, okay? So to find the x-intercept in an equation, so if we're given equations, we set the y equal to 0. And that'll make more sense when we do it. And then you solve for x. And then the opposite, to find the y-intercept, okay, since we know the y-intercept has that 0 for x, we set the x equal to 0, and then you would solve for the y. So down here we have an equation. If I can get to it. Oh, let's see. Okay, so find the x and y intercepts of this equation. So for the x-intercept, I automatically, this is just kind of a routine that I do. If I'm finding the x-intercept, I do this to find my ordered pair to remind me what I'm doing. And since I'm finding the x-intercept, I know that the y is 0. That way I put the answer in the right spot. Okay, and then this is your equation that we're dealing with. And to find the x-intercept, we're going to set the y to 0. So wherever the y is, I'm going to plug 0 in. And then I'm just going to rewrite it just so you can remember how this all works out. And then we're going to minus 6 to both sides. And then we're going to divide by 3. So x is negative 2. And so I'm going to put negative 2 here, maybe. Okay. And then to solve for the y-intercept, then I know that the x is 0. Because sometimes you find the right answer, but then you put it in the wrong spot. Like you mix up the x and y, especially if you don't show your work like some of you are famous for. Okay, so for the y-intercept, the x is 0. So back to this equation, I'm going to rewrite it over here. So we have y equals 3, and then I would plug that 0 in. And I know you already know that's 0, but I'm just showing you what happens here. And so 3 times 0 is obviously 0, and so we have y equals 6. It's pretty easy. You just have to take the time to show some of your work. Otherwise, you mess up and try to do it mentally and get your negatives and stuff messed up. So find the x and y intercept of each one. So for the x-intercept, I know that my y is 0. And so I'm putting that 0 in here. So I have 0 equals negative x plus 5. I'm going to minus the 5, negative x, and then we take the opposite of each one. So we have 5, 0. So the x-intercept, you can just leave it here if you want. Otherwise, they have a spot for it. That doesn't really matter. Okay, and then for the y-intercept, I know that my x is 0. And so I'm going to do y equals, and I know that 0 plus 5 is 5. So it's 5. So 0, 5. Again, it's pretty easy. You just got to take your time for silly mistakes. And it's also pretty easy when it's in y-intercept form. So that's another skill you already know how to do. So you could switch all your equations to this. So you go ahead and do number 2 and 3, and I will write them in, so you pause it and See what you get. Okay, for number 2, there's your different intercepts here. We added 8, and then we had 1/2 x. So remember, let's use our number sense. Instead of dividing by 1/2, let's times by 2. And so we should get 16. And then the next one, again, try to use, because I did it mentally, we're going to minus 2, so we get that. And then I imagine in my head that I'm doing -2 times this reciprocal. So I'm timesing it by the 3 because that would be on top, which was 6. And then I have 6/4, and it's a positive because they're both negative, and then it reduces to that. Please try to force yourself to do some of that. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Okay, so there's different ways you can do ones that are not in slope-intercept form. Some people prefer to switch it. So you can, go like this and have, let's see here, +2, and then you have y equals x minus 2, because you got to switch the sign of everything. And then you can do it the same as what we were just doing. There's also a way that might be kind of confusing on the video. It's called the thumb method. And when your equation is in this form, which is that standard form ax plus by equals c. Oh my golly. The thumb method is kind of like zeroing out one of them. So basically, you're going to zero out. It doesn't matter which one we do first, but if we cover the x with our thumb, that basically means we're zeroing it out, like covering it up. And so that would represent making x 0. And so then you have -y equals 2. So we know that y equals -2. Okay, so we covered up the x. So now with our other thumb, we're going to cover up the -y. And so then when we cover that up with our thumb, if you visualize covering that up, you have left is x equals 2. And so that's, some people prefer that because you don't have to change it into y equals mx plus b form. And so then you would have your 2, 0, because we zeroed out the y. Another thing you can do is like we were doing before, and you can just leave it like this and plug the zeros in here, which is basically what we're doing, but we call it the thumb method because you cover it. And I will show an example like through the bell work. Okay, so the next one, I'm going to cover my 3x with a 0. And so then what I have left is -2y equals 12. And so I have y equals -6. Okay, then I'm going to cover my y with a 0. So we cover up the -2y. The negative has to go covered up with it. And then we have 3x equals 12. So we have x equals 4. See, now I like that one better than solving for y, and I just think it's a quicker way. Okay, number 6. I'm going to cover up the 8x. So I'm covering that with a 0. And so we have, the main thing is people try to do it without showing any work, and then they mess up, equals -10. Wait a minute, whoa. Yeah, okay, that's right. And then we have y equals -1. Then I'm going to cover up my y with a 0. And so we have 8x equals -10. And so we have x equals -10/8, which is -5/4. -5/4. And there's my x and y. So when you go to graph these equations, you'll graph these points, and those are your x and y intercepts. And then you just draw a line through them. And you can also figure out the slope between them and draw more dots, but you don't have to. So this is another way to graph a line. So on these, I'm going to have you do them and then pause it, and then you can look at them. And you can graph it, you can do any method you want, but they really want you to practice finding just the X. So let's just do the X and Y intercepts. Okay, number 7 and 8. There are your, I did the thumb method. I covered each one and canceled them out, and they were pretty easy to do in my head. And then you graph those dots. I can't get them perfectly with my finger on here. And then 9 and 10. 10 is probably the only one that maybe people got confused because it's 7/2. So if you think in your head, that's 3.5. And so you just kind of go on the half. Okay. Make sure you're practicing the practice problems.